Welcome to this edition of St. Nersess Seminary's Wisdom in Ministry series. These interviews are a precious opportunity to preserve the distilled experiences of life in ministry as seen through the eyes of 12 senior priests and Yettitskins. Whether as graduates of St. Nersess Seminary or in faculty, staff, and administrative roles, their service has been an inspiration to our community. We welcome the chance to preserve their wisdom for future generations of seminarians. I am Donna Sirounian, Marketing and Fundraising Director at the seminary, and today I have the privilege speaking with Father Stepanos Doudoukjian, pastor of St. Peter Armenian Church in Waterville, New York. I've also known Father Stepanos for most of my life, as we are both former parishioners of St. Thomas Church. Gerhard, would you share with us an overview of your ministry? What parishes have you served? What roles have you played over the years? Give us some background.
Sure. Thank you so much, Donna. Ever since the 12 Vocations event and the preparatory work prior to that, I never saw myself really as, when you said 12 senior priests. It's hard to think that, since I began official ministry, it's over 28 years in the church, which is just, it's a wild thought when I sit and think about it, because like you said, I can close my eyes and go back probably 40 years ago when we were at an ACYOA event at St. Thomas in one of those conference rooms. And, that's unbelievable. It's been a long time in the church. So, I graduated seminary in 1993, and I got married in 1994. I did some time overseas in 1993, and I immediately began as pastoral assistant / youth director at Holy Martyrs, the Armenian Church of Holy Martyrs in Bayside. Simultaneously, I was also working part-time in the Department of Youth Ministry at the diocese, and I was doing a little bit of college ministry and ACYOA senior ministry and youth ministry. So those were the first positions I had, and like I said, that was around 1994 actually, and then in 1995 November, I began my pastorate at St. Peter Armenian Church, and for I consider most of my time here, it's been, it's 26 years now. That I've been here, although there was a break in between for 3 years officially, where I was the full-time director of youth and vocations for the seminary, and also prior to those 3 years, there were 2 years that I was working part-time in that position, so 5 years in youth and vocations. And then 13 years as the director of the St. Nersess Summer Conferences, which I can't believe now that that's 12 years ago since I've exited those programs that, were wonderful, and they were so life-giving for me and I think for others. But, the 13 years was a good run, and I'm glad I stopped when I did.
That's great.
And yeah, that's it. So that brings us to 2021 in the crazy world we're living in now.
It is a crazy world, that's for sure. So over the years, who have been some of your mentors, or who inspired you from any of the time periods that you just mentioned, in either choosing your path or helped you along your path?
Sure. Well, I was 15 years old when I first kind of was coerced into going to St. Nersess to the summer programs. I remember a handful of my friends from St. Thomas in my grade that had gone and came back and said, you guys all have to go. And that was in particular with Suzanne Doudoukjian, who's Suzanne Akian, and Karen Saradarian Aslanian. So yeah, kind of hemmed and hawed, and a handful of us went, and it was the summer of 1981. And I had also met, at the time, Deacon Michael. He came to our St. Thomas ACYOA event. And then Suzanne had the youth group over, and I lived a few houses away. So I went there, and, you know, I mean, I was somewhat involved in our parish, but really my view of the parish of church really was very narrow. It was just specifically like St. Thomas growing up as church, right? And so Deacon Michael also encouraged me to go to the seminary, to the summer programs. And, you know, that first summer, by day 3, I was really hooked. And I always think back on that and think how three is really a significant number. You know, 3 days, Jesus had his resurrection, right? And there was some sort of transformation that took place in me in those 3 days. And I knew at that point I was coming back, and I couldn't wait. And anyway, it's just kind of, I'm a little tangent on the stories here, but I'll never forget the summer of 1981, when I was done with the summer programs, went back to Asbury Park, where I was staying for the summer with my mom, and my dad was commuting. And it was a weekend, and so my older siblings were all there, and we were barbecuing, and we all sat down to eat. And everyone started eating, and I got up and I said, stop. we have to pray. And you know, we hadn't really done too much praying. You know, we did it for the holidays, really, right? So there I am at the barbecue, saying Joshua Getsuk that I had learned at the seminary. And I think some eyes were rolling when we were having that barbecue with my older siblings. And you know, it's been that type of life really ever since those
Awesome.
experiences. There's been a few others, and you know, Father Arnok, who was our priest growing up at St. Thomas, he was a very unique individual, and full of life and spunk and enthusiasm, and, you know, really took interest in his parishioners and us as young people. So it was kind of neat to forge that relationship. There, Arnok was, you know, much older than myself at the time, so it was a different type of relationship, but he was very important. Louise Kalamkarian, who's now Reverend Louise in the Episcopalian Church, her and Deacon Joe at St. Thomas were quite influential. Louise was also someone who strongly suggested that I go to the summer programs. And Deacon Joe was one of my first acolyte teachers. Father Gadabed is someone I would add, or Father Yeprem, Father Kevork from California, those three in very unique ways. And probably the last person that I would add, I mean, there's others too that have influenced me in some smaller ways or different ways, but Father Gada and Gadanian was also a huge influence, because when I came to this parish, he was the retired pastor at the time. He was the pastor emeritus. And I got to spend about 15 years with him. And it was treasured time. He is such a godly, saintly man. And I just loved talking with him, going on trips. We'd go to diocesan events together, and he'd impart his wisdom, and we'd play tavlu. And anyway, it was just really, it was a really good relationship. I was long-winded, but
No, wonderful that you had so many.
yeah.
So through the years, has it been possible to balance your life, balance your ministry with your family, along with self-care and personal growth? Have you found a balance?
Those are interesting questions. I would say early on, definitely not. And I, growing up with the influence of the priests like Der Arnak and Der Gaden and Der Arten, Der Karakin, although he's younger than those other priests, but they were, I always saw them as like taskmasters. They were like nonstop. And I remember even a few of them saying that they missed most of their births of their children because of their ministry. And that was later on when they had shared that with me. But early on, that's just how I saw an Armenian priest. We're taskmasters. We just go and go. And I remember that coming up in a conversation during my CPE program. And so it was something that, came to the forefront a little bit more after I settled in here in the parish. And I remember there were a handful of ladies in our women's guild here locally. They would always say, "You're doing too much and you have to consider us your second mom. Make sure that you take a day off, take some time for yourself." So, then we, had children, and, life changed a bit after that, having children. And I think that itself helped me. A wife and children helped me to find a better mix, a better balance. It was by no means perfect at all, but, I gave every effort that I could, and especially with my kids, I made it a point, and the parish was really very open to it. But I attended mostly every baseball game or basketball game for my kids, and things of that nature, and which I was really very fortunate, because looking back at the clergy of our past, I don't think they had that balance.
What about yourself? Taking care of yourself?
Well, that's always been a process. I tend to put myself last, and I think those that give care generally at times neglect themselves. So, and I remember there was a famous quote in CPE: "Who cares for the caretaker?" So I remind myself that, and I'm still not great at it, but I try.
So here are a few descriptions. Tell me where you feel you fit in. Priest teacher, priest doctor, priest scholar, priest soldier. Are any of these descriptions of your priesthood closer to what describes you?
Those are great descriptions. And I would say there's a little bit in each of them that I can resonate with. By virtue of being a priest, we're teachers, and my degree was in education, and I chose a major because I was thinking of seminary at the time. I had started in business when I really wasn't sure if I wanted to do, if I wanted to go to seminary and pursue being a priest. So I started in business for a year, and I realized it was definitely not for me. I came from a family of bankers, and it's while there's helpful characteristics of finance, which is important in anything you do. I didn't like the mentality, right? And so as part of that, that has resonated with me. And doctor, I always, we call ourselves doctors of the soul, in a sense, right? And scholar, that's probably my least one that I resonate with. I've never been a real scholarly person. I mean, I like to learn, and I learn in my own way, but you know, that's just not necessarily me. And soldier is another one that, you know, I feel like, you know, it's clergymen, we're soldiers of God. And actually all of us, when we're all baptized, we become soldiers of God's army. But I have one of my own, actually, that is priest servant, that really resonates the most with me. I've always connected with Jesus Christ as servant, a suffering servant, but more so a servant. He came to serve his people, and so I try to imitate that type of lifestyle as much as I can. I'm here to serve, and really, that, you know, I mentioned it in the interview for the 12 vocations when they came to my parish at the end of the summer, and I've always felt that my priesthood is most defined in the lives of my people, and I'm here to serve them, and in a variety of capacities at a variety of times in their lives. So it's an honor. I consider it an honor and a privilege to be like a co-journeyman with my people in all of life's experiences, in their joys, in their sorrows, in their difficulties and challenges, in their successes. And, you know, so many of those terms are exhibited in life experiences, right? The joys of having a child, the joys of graduation, the joys of baptisms, the joys of summer barbecues, and, you know, the challenges of illness, challenges of loss, loss of jobs, just a variety of difficulties that people have in life. And so I've just resonated the most with being a servant and being at the side of my people.
I have to agree with that, having talked to you over the years. So it's a great way to sum up your ministry. So let's talk about the youth. You've been very innovative with your programs and trying to generate or maintain or retain interest from the younger people. How do you encourage lay people, particularly the youth, to participate in the parish, in the leadership, in ACYOA? What works for you?
Well, there are times that things work, and there's times that things don't work as well. And you know, that's part of the challenge of ministry, and it's also the challenge of being a pastor of 26 years. I believe that, you know, family is so important in when young people come to church. Young people generally just don't come on their own. So we have to work with the family, with the parents, and encourage them as well to make the commitment to bring them to church. But in general, you know, if you can get youth to come, I just like to learn about them and have them talk, right? You know, although sometimes I go on tangents when I'm talking with them, but I try to do programming where it's interactive. I've always enjoyed doing and leading retreats. You know, many of the generations of the kids here in my parish for 26 years will talk about the various lock-ins that we've had here in the parish. And they've been exceptional, just wonderful, from really in-depth and deep conversations about faith and just personal stuff, personal journey, to playing sardines with all the lights out in the church hall, you know, and all the classrooms and everything around it. And you know, I'm usually right in there, you know, having fun with them. So, some of it I think is, it doesn't matter how old you are. I remember hearing that when I was much younger with other leaders in youth ministry. Doesn't matter age. It really it matters that you love youth, that you love people, and with that, you can you can have an impact on their lives, and so that doesn't necessarily fully answer your question. I also, we're in a time of life where technology is really the main way of communicating. It's not like what it was before, where you used to put a flyer in the mail and mail it to all the ASUIOA families. Although I still think that print media has its role. There's texting, there's IMing, there's Instagram, and there's Snapchat, and some of those I'm on and some of those I'm not on. But I tend to reach out as often as I can to our young people. I try to remember the special events or things that are going on in their lives, and so I reach out to them via text for that. I know you had a huge exam coming up, a big final. How did you do? I was praying for you.
Do they respond?
They do. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which is great. I mean, not all, sometimes when I ask them to, to come and to help out at, the food festival or something, sometimes they don't always reply. But when it's a one-on-one text, generally there's more of a reply. And I talk with them in person, obviously, when they're here too. So they know that that's on my mind. I've been thinking of them. So, and
So important.
I think many of them they appreciate that. I remember when I was at Holy Martyrs way back in the day, 1994, I started a program there. It was called Lunch with the Deacon. And it was great. I went to a handful of the kids' schools, and once again, it's a very different world now. But sometimes I take them out, and we'd go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac or something, and just have the opportunity to kind of meet them on their playing field where they're at, and many of them were so enthused and excited. Wow, the deacon's coming to visit me at my school. So I will never forget that. So I still try to do some of those things still to this day. Let's go grab a cup of coffee or whatever, or let's meet up.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So during your ministry, what experiences, activities, relationships have given you special satisfaction, or the most satisfaction?
Yeah. There's a handful of things that come to my mind with this question. There's some of the regular activities that we do year in and year out that are special, and I enjoy them. When I think of ministry and I think of my role as a pastor, there's two experiences in particular that I'll never forget. Really, they shaped my ministry. One was Setrok Nalbanyan, who needed a liver transplant. This is now like 16 years ago, or maybe even more. And so once that became public and clear to me that he needed this, I got involved with the family, and then one day I got a phone call that he was in the hospital in really serious condition, and it was urgent that they find a donor. And I met with the family. It was a very emotional time, and it's something that I looked at some of the questions, something I learned in ministry that I didn't learn in seminary. A couple of these experiences that I'm going to share were definitely that. I then picked up the phone and started calling the organ donation places in the country, wherever it was. It was big then, but it's even much bigger now, right? And I started learning a few things. And in particular, I remember speaking to one lady who was in the Midwest, and I went over the whole situation and how we're trying to find him a donor. And he was on the list in New England, in the New England region, and he was like 800 and something on the list, which basically meant death. Like there's no way he's going to live. And so, I mean, it was hours and hours of like research and information and conversations. And this one lady told me, she said, with what you're telling me and all the records that you've sent me, she said he would be number one on our list if he was able to become a resident here and come here. And it was unbelievable. And so, I mean, I remember calling up Talene and saying, we got to get to Indiana. We got to go there right now. And she's like, I can't go right now, but let me pack. And we raised money. We did, I still have this faith bracelet, that white heart. The parish made these faith bracelets like 17 years ago. We made like $30,000 in donations and through these type of activities for the family to sustain them for a year and a half while they were waiting, 2 years. Anyway, we got them to Indiana, and within a couple of weeks of being there, they got a phone call that there was a liver available. And at the last minute, after reviewing their records as much as they could, they made the decision not to give him the transplant, because they realized that so many of his multivisceral organs in his stomach area, that most of those tissues were dead. And that if they did the one liver, everything else wouldn't function, he would die. And then it became incredibly complicated. Then he needed a multivisceral transplant. And he was one of the early ones in the country to get one. And so that happened, and once again, like a year after that. I mean, he just held on to this hope, and we prayed, and anyway, he got this transplant, and he's a miracle to this day. And he was on death's door a handful of times. I had to fly out there, drive out there. One time they said, you need to call your pastor and, do your last rites. And I was there at his bedside with his family, crying and praying. Went home, and I'll never forget, that was the most challenging and difficult home blessing that I ever did. We blessed their new home while he was in the hospital with his photo, kind of thinking that he was going to die, right? And so the family went to bed, and the grandfather, Deacon Hudant, we had a heart-to-heart at the table, and he just started crying to me. He said, what are we going to do tomorrow? We just got this house. How are we going to get back? I said, we're not there yet. Let's take it step by step, hour by hour. And the next morning, she got a call saying, it's unbelievable. His vitals are normalizing. His eyes had rolled back. His eyes were now straight, and he was interactive. And that was just one example of like his miraculous life. And it was just a complete honor to be a part of his team, and in some cases taking the lead on some of the things. And so spiritually, pastorally, that was like one of my greatest experiences, a great victory.
That's amazing, honestly.
Yeah.
I was not aware of that.
And then the second one, I'll be really brief with the second one, but on an October day in 2001, shortly after 9/11, this kind of Middle Eastern Armenian man is standing on the steps of our church. And I had no idea who he was, and kind of treaded cautiously and introduced myself. And in his broken English, he said, I'm Armenian, and I'm here from Turkmenistan. And he was here on a visa, and he knew that, he couldn't go back because of persecution. And so that began like a 2-year process, at least, of working with immigration lawyers and, gathering records and information and interviews and testing and all sorts of things. From, I had him tested for PTSD, and sure enough, he came back as, having severe PTSD and all those different things. Anyway, he was granted political asylum.
Wow.
His daughter was grandfather claused in, so his wife and daughter came immediately, and it's just that's another phenomenal story, and a journey. Yeah, and so those things were, they didn't teach me that. No one can teach you anything like that in seminary. How do you deal with a multivisceral transplant parishioner, or how do you deal with someone that's on the brink of persecution in their country and ends up in this country and wants to come here.
Right.
And so I still deal with those type of issues. I have one, work on right on my plate now, and it's tough, but those are the greatest joys.
Yeah. And so those can also be classified as overcoming challenges. Are there any other challenges that you have overcome during your ministry that you want to touch upon?
Well, there's always challenges that everyone has in their life, and I believe too in their work or their vocation. And so, there are times that I think, am I smart enough? Do I have enough faith? Do I have enough perseverance? Do I have enough confidence? Those things. I mean, they after 26 years, I can definitely say that, I'm much firmer when now on my 2 feet than I was when I first started. But still to this day, there are things that are challenging and difficult. But I depend on my faith. I go, it's for me, it's just my personal faith journey as well. And some days it's a struggle. And, there are times that I have conversations with parishioners or people that I'm like, I just don't get it. And, they don't, they don't get it, or they can't at their present moment believe in God for the circumstances that are happening in their life. And, I mean, I place no judgment on them. That's so important, and I think, it's going to lead into some other questions leading up to this, but, we're in a very difficult world that we're living in now. And so many people are living fragile lives. And I myself, there's some days that it's very fragile for me. COVID was very difficult and has been difficult. And early on, it was, I was like absorbing everything. And it was hard. It was really difficult. I knew a handful of people in our parish that perished from COVID, people that were hospitalized, and all of our communities, we all have those stories, especially like in Long Island. There it was like ground zero. Elmhurst Hospital, right, in Queens, unbelievable. So I think of all those experiences and all those challenges that that we have to go through. And I think of Jesus and the cross. I was just sharing that with someone last night, that we call ourselves Christian, right? And it's not by name only. We have to do it by action as well. And if Jesus had to take up a cross and die for us and suffer on that cross, there's no skirting the cross for all of us. Everyone has their own cross to follow, not to sound cliche, but, in some there are multiple crosses. And for some, the cross is like made of steel, right? But in the end, that's our God who did that. It's our God who did that because he loves us so much. And I just try to share that with my challenges and people's challenges, that amidst all of this, whether we know it or not, God loves us. He still loves us, whether we doubt or not. And doubting is I love that word. I embrace it, because every baptism I do, the first gospel reading that we say as we enter into the sanctuary is Matthew 28, the Great Commission. And so Jesus directed them to go up to the mountain to pray. This was the disciples following the post-resurrection appearance. So they'd been with him for 3 years. They learned from Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They pastored with him. Jesus pushed them out to be servants, pushed them and challenged them in their ministries. Then he appeared to them after his resurrection. And so they go up to the mountain to worship, but some doubted. That sums everything up. There are going to be times that, I don't always get it. And that, it's a challenge, especially in the world we live in, especially in the society we live in, especially in America. It's like everything is right there at your fingertip, instant. Got to have it. What's your answer? Give me the answer right now. Or, I want that, I want the Whopper meal right now.
So true. So true. So you have all these great experiences and a lot of wisdom. What advice or encouragement or caution would you give to your younger self? Or what would you tell yourself about your ministry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I'm one of the elder priests now, so it's still wild to think that.
Hardly.
But, what's that?
Hardly. You're not that
old.
old.
Right. Well, I'm getting up there. So, the thing I remind myself with, I say two things to myself now, and I wish I would have said it when I was young, but be gentle with yourself and give yourself some grace. And that's so important. We're our worst enemies. And, we're the hardest on ourselves. We're our worst critics. And so, there are times that I just beat myself up. And, but the older I get, those words resonate even more. And so I would tell my younger self, chill out a little bit, be gentle, take it easy. It's, it's not the destination, it's the journey. Right. So grace and gentleness.
That's great. So let's conclude with the future. Heard a lot about your past. What is your vision for the church of the future? What part should tradition play? And how do you see the role of the priest going forward?
Yeah, this was an interesting question. When you say, what do you see the role of the priest going forward? Is that like myself or the priesthood in general?
However you want to interpret it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, we can have all the vision that we want. It's God's church, first of all. I always remind myself that. We make up the church, right? We, the people, are the church. But ultimately, it's God's church. And, nothing will be able to destroy God's church. Well, we could say that on one hand, and then there's challenges that we face, that, we have dwindling communities, less people in church on Sundays. And now that's all magnified with this pandemic. So, but ultimately, knowing that it's God's church, the future is always bright. There's always hope in the future. Um, I, I believe that, tradition is an important part of who we are as Armenians, whether it's tradition with a capital T, and I noticed this was a capital T in the in the questionnaire that I received. So, and then there's tradition with a small t. I think those are important, and I believe that, you know, I remember well, go back to when I was younger and early on in seminary, my mother would tell me, Gregory, you have to do whatever you can do to get people through the doors of the church, to get them in there. And yeah, I've learned a lot of that from that wisdom of my mom. And I still think that some of that is true. And I've seen that type of experience unfold. But I've also seen where, people will just strictly help out at the festival, and that's church to them, right? And while it's great because, the church gives all of us opportunities to be servants and to serve God through the church, our church is not church unless it's liturgy, right? Badarak. And I think it's really important that we make Badarak as attractive as possible. And, and we're dealing with fourth and fifth generations of Armenians that are here in this country. Of course, we're dealing with immigrants that still come to this country, to this great country, the United States. I think that, using some English is an important tool. Some will argue with me, and I firmly believe that worship has its own language. I do understand that, but I think in our minds, when we look at a divine liturgy book, and we're there in Badarak praying, and we're hearing it and then reading in English, there's something that changes in the mind, in the brain. And it can still be very prayerful, and perhaps for many it is prayer, but it's like another step. It's not hearing it in your mother tongue. And it's hard because, everyone has a different mother tongue in the Armenian Church. But I think we shouldn't be afraid of loosening some of the some of the restrictions. And there's something to be said about vernacular at times. I'm not saying, I've heard some of our hymns sung in English, and I really don't like them at all. But I think there are some key prayers of our Badarak that should be audible in English. And I've had people tell me that, because I'll alternate them sometimes, English and Armenian, depending on the time of the year. And people will say, I never even knew that existed. I never heard it like that. And people
knew what it meant. Yeah.
What it meant. And they came to me in tears, like spiritually in tears, moved by it. So I think there's something to be said about that. But we have to tread cautiously, obviously. Change is difficult. And if we do too much change, then we run the risk of losing what we've had. And we don't want to do that. It's a gem. Our church is a gem.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I mean, just the role of the priest going forward. I don't think that ever changes, right? I just, I pray for our seminary. I pray for our seminaries. I pray for our young people to feel the calling to become priests and to serve His holy church. And I also know it's challenging. It's a very difficult path to take, but it's the most rewarding path that we can choose. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time.